him to help dogs that are struggling to cope in a variety of situations. He has presented at the ICAWC, the Association of Charity Vets, the National Dog Welfare Conference, Chennai, India, and the Cancun University Veterinary Department, amongst others. Steve also has presented in workshops on behavior at shelters in many countries around the world. Steve Goward.
We have a big room for a workshop, so please feel free to come close. I don't bite. Really appreciate another opportunity to have a voice in what we're all involved in animal welfare, in improving the lives of our animals in whatever areas we're working in. So it's a real privilege and an honor, and I really appreciate that opportunity. I've actually written 2 talks, I've written 2 presentations, I've only got time for one of them. The first one is really an introduction to this subject of enrichment and how that affects quality of life and welfare of the animals in our shelters. My focus is on dogs, clues in the name. I work with Dogs Trust and have done now for actually 18 years. Time goes quickly. But really, these sort of procedures and ideas can be used for other animals in a sort of a captive environment. So whether you're working with dogs or cats or other animals, it is about understanding their needs and how we can deliver the best care for them while they're with us. So the second presentation is going to be available on the website. That's going to have more ideas, more pictures, more videos of enrichment ideas, but I want to start by just making sure that we're really clear on what enrichment, quality of life and welfare, and how they all come together. So I'm going to start, obviously, with, we're going to look at the meaning and the importance of the term of enrichment and why that affects quality of life. And Norma, just earlier in the conference, talked about people's quality of life and that we can improve that because we can ask them, we can find out what they enjoy and what they like to do. With our animals, that's much tougher. But we can still do it. We just have to have a better understanding of the animals that we're dealing with and create relationships and listen to them. They all speak to us in their own way. Then we're going to look at how we can improve our enrichment procedures in our shelters with limited staff and obviously a limited budget. So if we look at what enrichment is, it really is just making things better. That's all it is. If you enrich something, you just make it better. So if you think about your shelters now and the shelters that you work in and volunteer and attend on whatever capacity you do, if you think about, well, if there's something that we could just do a little bit better, then you have enriched that environment. So we do get a little bit sort of focused on adding things like toys and bedding and things for animals to play with and interact with. Absolutely, that is enrichment. But we need to also consider some of the things that we do daily, some of the things that we kind of take for granted that actually might not be enriching the dog's life. So simple things like feeding dogs, the way we feed dogs, what we feed them, how we feed them. Really what it comes down to is how does that individual dog feel when it's being fed? If it's feeling anxious, fearful, because other dogs fight around that food, then that's not a positive emotion. And therefore, we're not enriching that dog's life, even by giving them the food. So we have to take a step back when we look at our shelters and look at our procedures and just think, how can we do something a little bit different? How can we make this everyday activity better? And because it's us doing it, it doesn't cost us anything other than a bit of time and a bit of a thought process. So, this is a quote by Chris Jenkins, and I think it really does count for all animals that we deal with. Like I say, I think this does count for dogs, particularly in an environment where we're dealing with street dogs going into shelters, because we are absolutely changing their lives. We are restricting their choices. We are putting them into a situation where they are no longer in control of their lives, and that absolutely affects welfare and quality of life. Because if we don't get choices, that affects our quality of life. So if we look at right back at the beginning and we think back to what was originally called the 5 freedoms, now often referred to as welfare needs, I think that's really important that we have that, that basis to work from. But I think we should not just say, yes, we feed our dogs, or yes, we give water to our dogs, or yes, we give shelter to our dogs. Again, small improvements in all those areas can actually make a big difference. From our veterinary care point of view, our healthcare point of view, making differences in those areas will absolutely improve their quality of life. So we all probably have our own niggles as we get older. My back is hurting today. My knee hurts most days. That does affect my quality of life. But I can do something about that. I can say, today my back's hurting, or today's my knee's hurting. Now with dogs and with many animals, it's very difficult to identify animals in pain and discomfort. So we have to get to know them. We have to understand what their normal walking gait is or their normal activity levels are. And when that changes, take note and go, maybe there's something wrong today. So I think it's really important that we have a good understanding of the welfare needs or the freedoms, and we base our welfare on those, but we do need to explore them in greater depth to really improve quality of life for individual animals. Because it is about that individual. So, like I said, we all are fully aware of these, and I think we don't need to dwell on these. Everybody knows these. Everyone tries to get to that point. I often ask in a workshop situation, which is the most difficult to achieve? So, is there a consensus of opinion in this room? Which of the freedoms is the most difficult to achieve in a shelter situation? Any ideas? Normal behavior. I think that's a really tricky one, isn't it? Especially when we consider what their normal behaviors would be if they were on the streets. And their normal behaviors would be spend time looking for food, finding a place that is safe and secure, socializing with friends, exploring the environment, and then they get put into a small shelter, potentially in a small environment with other dogs that they don't know and don't have those social ties to, and we expect them to get on with it, and they do get on with it, and this is the very tricky thing, because dogs are amazing at adapting, but that doesn't mean that their quality of life is not affected. So I think normal behaviors is definitely something that we struggle with, and I think the other thing is the freedom from pain, injury, and disease because of the environment that we're dealing with. And that's why a good, solid veterinary care is so, so important. And we really can't underestimate the value of that. So there are other resources available. So this is something that's available online. And this is a welfare assessment that I've shared with people in the past. And what I'd always say to people, because people say, oh, can you give me a welfare assessment? How do we do a welfare assessment? And I think really it's very important for organizations to develop their own. Not so you can make it easy and say, yes, all our animals have good welfare, but I think it's really good to challenge yourselves and look at your organization and go, okay, well, these are the areas that we need to focus on. So obviously we start with those kind of welfare principles that we talked about in the freedoms, but we expand them. So good feeding, absence of prolonged thirst. Now something as simple as changing the opportunities for dogs to drink can have a huge impact on their welfare and their quality of life. I've visited many shelters where they have one drinking area. So there might be 30 dogs in an area, and there might be sort of one large well area where the dogs can drink. Now, if there are a couple of dogs there that value that water greatly and are prepared to fight the other dogs for it, that compromises the entire group's welfare and quality of life because their access to water is much harder. And we all know what it's like when we're thirsty and if we can't get a drink. But if that's happening every single day, and all the anxiety around that actually has a huge impact on their quality of life. Simply by changing that presentation of water, so we'll have 3 water stations, or we have a very long trough with water in. Whatever works for the individual shelters, but expanding the areas that dogs can get water, and the same with our feeding processes. When we think about how we feed our dogs, and again, I've seen a number of different ways dogs are fed, and it's very tricky when you've got large groups of dogs. If you've got 10, 20, 30 dogs plus in a group, trying to get all those dogs fed at the same time without fights breaking out is incredibly difficult. And again, we go back to that quality of life issue. If they are anxious and fearful about being fed because it involves potential injury, pain, and discomfort, then we're going to have a negative impact on that individual's quality of life. So looking at those procedures, how we can make things more positive for those individual dogs on a daily basis actually enriches their lives. And that's what we're really trying to achieve. So just a quick question, which one do we think has the better quality of life? Now, we've talked about natural behaviors. So dogs, my old dog particularly liked to dig in muddy puddles. She was a black, hairy Newfoundland cross. So she had paws like shovels. So when she dug, you know, she was digging down to China. She could create craters just in minutes. So she loved to dig. So which has the better quality of life? The dog that has, you know, muddy face, been digging in the garden, or the dog in the bath? Hands up who thinks the muddy face. Yeah, because of that natural behavior, enjoying it. But actually we don't know on this photo, do we? Because we don't know what they're thinking about. So actually, this guy on the left could be saying, oh, I've just had the best time. I've been digging away. It's been fantastic. I've been having an absolute ball. And the other one's going, oh, I hate baths. But what if it's not that? What if actually, if this dog is worried that they're going to be told off for digging in the garden? Maybe he's been digging in the veg patch, and he's going to get told off. So actually, he's worried now. He's anxious or fearful about what's going to happen. Whereas this guy absolutely loves a bath. Some dogs do. They just love that time with their owner and feeling warm and clean. Some dogs do. So we can't presume. We cannot presume what the dog is thinking. We can get better at knowing through body language and their choices. You know, if you, for example, you start running a bath and the dog leaves the house, then we probably know the dogs realize, oh, bath time, I'm out of here. That's something that they might not enjoy. So we just need to be, you know, and the only way we can do that with our dogs in our shelters is to know them, to understand them. And this is where assessment really comes in. And I talked a little bit about it on Friday in our session. And getting to know these dogs and understanding what their needs are on a wider scale, but also on an individual stage, is also the only way we're going to really help and define what good quality of life and welfare is. So if we think about shelters, are they the best place for our dogs? Well, they're not the places that we want our dogs to be. We want our dogs to be safe and secure. Now, sometimes that does mean that shelters are the place that they need to be, but would they choose to be there? I don't know. I mean, many of you have shelters. Do you get dogs coming up to the shelter saying, any room, can I come in? Or are there, you know, you guys going out there and going, come on, you're coming to the shelter? And I know why you're doing it, because it's important to keep them safe, and they may well have health issues, injuries. You're there to look after them, and you're there to make their lives better. But from the dog's perspective, the shelter is a very alien place. It's a very difficult place for many dogs to be. So let's say, you know, if they choose the street, why would they choose the street? What is it about the street that is different and potentially better than the shelter? Freedom. I mean, it really comes back to that choice, doesn't it? Those choices. I can, if I want to, get up and walk down the street and look for some food, or look for a friend, or just mill about, or go digging somewhere, or find a nice comfy place to sleep. You know, those choices are so important, and they affect quality of life hugely. So yeah, absolutely, those choices. Why would they choose a shelter? You know, if they would choose a shelter, why would that be? Food. That's really the only thing, isn't it? If we really think about it from the dog's perspective, the only thing it's not the only thing that we offer a lot more. But actually, from their point of view, the regular food is the only thing that they would actually probably choose. Yes, we give them health care, and yes, we give them love and attention, and we try and find them, you know, appropriate homes, etc. But from their point of view, it's just the regular food. So choices and food, absolutely. So it is a balancing act, and I've got some photos here, and I'm going to do a little case study within this talk to talk about how change can happen that it doesn't happen quickly, and really we do need to have a long-term plan. Because we all want to change now. We all want something better for our animals right now. And that's what we're all here for, is to find out how we can make those changes. But we know through experience, because many of you have been doing it for many, many years, that it takes time. So we have to be patient to some degree. So I'm going to go through this case study because it's a 5-year project that I think, for me, it was inspiring to be involved in. So there's a bit of research just to sort of back up what we kind of already know. So there's some interesting papers on dogs entering shelters and that they encounter stressful situations. And it's not, from our point of view, it makes sense. New routines, unfamiliar sights, sounds, smells, and we know how amazing the dog's sense of smell is. So all those dogs compacted together, and potentially other animals too. There's going to be an overload to the senses. The noise levels in shelters is very different to the streets. And again, the lack of choices to get away from those noise levels. Unfamiliar people and other dogs, and I've said that already, is that when you put a dog from the street into a different group, confined spaces, lack of choices, there is definitely more likelihood of conflict. Because dogs generally would avoid conflict if they can. They don't really want to get into fights. It makes no sense from their own self-preservation point of view. They will fight for something that they really need, a high-value resource, but really they don't want to just go around looking for fights, because your lifespan is likely to be a lot less. And really, the interesting thing for me is this diversity in the quality of care provided in these shelters. I go to shelters all over the world, and I see a real variance in quality of care. Some of that's to do, much of it is to do with lack of funding. Some of it's to do with lack of education and knowledge and experience. So we have to consider that. And this is why when I talk about the people involved in shelters, that the people are so important. Yes, the design in the building is important too, but so if we think about stress, yes, dogs do exhibit stress when they go into shelters, but they do exhibit it in different ways. So you might have some dogs that are barking constantly or constantly on the move, but often we find in shelters, particularly when there is such a lack of choices, that dogs shut down and they go very quiet and they go very still. And it's quite difficult then for people to actually identify if those dogs are actually stressed or not. So I think that's something, again, that we need to get better at, understanding that, yes, it is a stressful environment, and dogs are likely to be under stress. And then if we can change things within that environment, we are likely to improve on those stress levels. So if we think about what makes a good shelter or dog rescue facility, does it have to be 5-star accommodation? Does it have to have their own 4-poster beds? Does it have to be the latest design? Now, these are Dogs Trust kennels, and they are amazing. Absolutely, they are amazing. And we have got there over a long time. It's taken us a long time to get there. And absolutely, it makes a difference to their welfare and their quality of life. But for me, it's not the biggest thing. Now, the property department might argue, but I don't think it is. From a behavior point of view, the biggest thing is actually these things, these two-legged things, the people. People in shelters make all the difference. The volunteers, the staff, the people that are involved in shelters have the biggest impact on a dog's quality of life and their welfare, because they're the ones that are supplying all the resources, giving the dogs all the attention, form the relationships, and those are the people that are actually going to have the biggest impact. So for me, this recipe for success, and again, this isn't science, this is just my experience over the last sort of 18 years or so. But if we have good people doing the right things at the right time, we impact hugely on the animal's welfare. Yes, the building is important, the protocols, what we do and how we do it are important, and I think it's good to have those written down, and new volunteers coming in are shown those appropriately to make sure that we are doing things consistently. And the numbers of animals that we deal with has a huge impact. And unfortunately, many shelters I go to are overcrowded, and that has such a big impact on the stress levels and the ability to give good quality care. So poor welfare, lack of investment in the people, not much thought of the building, the protocols mix and match, just everyone doing what they want to do, and too many dogs. That's when we start to see poor welfare. And unfortunately, that's all too common. Because we want to help every dog. And it's very difficult to say no. For those of you who are in shelters and you've got your capacity and you think, well, we're full, and then somebody else brings a dog along, how do you say, no, can't help you now? But we have to consider it. We have to think about it. We have to consider what our capacity for care is. And that is a very, very tough job to have. So if we think in the Dogs Trust sort of people side of things, we have our vet team. Our canine carers are the guys that are working in the kennels with the dogs every day. Our training team are the guys that are training our dogs. Our managers, our volunteers, fundraisers, education teams, and finally our adopters. And we shouldn't forget those, because we need to invest in those too. We need to give them information. We need to pass on information about that individual dog. Because if we want that quality of care, that quality of life that we've worked so hard to achieve, to continue, we have to make sure that the adopters understand what that dog's needs are as well. Now, that might just be a small leaflet or a handwritten piece of information. This is Fido. He really likes to lay in the sunshine, or he really likes to go for a walk in the park, or whatever it may be. But it's about short pieces of information that you can pass on. And I truly believe this, and this is something I'm working on at the moment with our own centres, is that the quality of care that our day-to-day dog handlers have, the higher quality and higher standard they have of dog handling, the better they appreciate the impact that they'll have. Because we see it all the time, and there are some dogs that come into our shelters and it takes a day or two before they start to come round. Others, it might be weeks and sometimes even months. But if the quality of handling and the quality of awareness of that individual dog's needs and body language, and Suzanne, my colleague, is going to be talking later about body language and how we identify when a dog is feeling anxious and fearful or happy, then the better impact that we will have. The trust is quicker. People try very hard to get to know a scared dog because they feel sorry for that dog and they're worried about that dog, so they try really hard, and they'll be putting a lot of pressure on that dog. A lot of the time with those very fearful dogs, actually it's just about being with them, spending time with them, but not putting pressure on them, not asking them to do things, not trying to constantly encourage them with food. By actually just slowing down, taking a bit of time, you can actually move things along a little bit faster. So my first suggestion is invest in the people. And I say invest, I'm not talking about spending money particularly. I'm talking about getting them trained, getting them around people that are good dog handlers. So you might have that, hopefully you have that in your shelter already. You have somebody that's really good at the handling of the dogs, or the catching of dogs, or the holding the dogs for veterinary procedures. If you have somebody with that skill set in your shelter, invest in them, give them more information, get them to a point where they can actually share that with other members of the team, and then you expand the knowledge right the way across the board. Because if we don't educate, if we don't train, if we don't empower and we don't reward, then people will go. And that's something that now in my current role in professional development in Dogs Trust is something that we're working hard to reduce. We don't want people to come have a year with us and then go off somewhere else. We want them to come, feel invested in, feel rewarded, feel like they've got other places to go within the organization, and keep them. Because especially when you've got volunteers coming in, and I think it was Jaya in the first talk was talking about when volunteers came in, and they might just come once and then leave and never come back again. We have to ask our question, why is that? Is that because the environment was too difficult for them, the job was too difficult for them, or did they not feel welcomed? So really it is important that we make sure that we invest in the people. And then, so like I said, for me, it's about when you get new people in, ask them about the situation. Don't presume they know nothing. And they might not do. But everyone has a different skill set. And it's very difficult when you've been in a shelter for a number of months or years to actually take a step back and look at, maybe, well, why do we do it? So I'd always say to people, encourage you to ask, why do we do it this way? Why do we feed this way? Why do we exercise this way? Whatever the protocols that we have. And then consider the numbers, how many animals. So the answer really is usually too many and then not enough. So we have too many animals, not enough people, not enough space, not enough money, and not much time. And that obviously is not a good recipe for good welfare. So my answer is, if we're going to build a shelter, and I've talked to a couple of people that are looking into sort of building shelters, the question should be, do we build our shelters for the amount of dogs that need our help? How big would that shelter be? Or the amount that we can actually help to a good standard? And I was talking earlier to a couple of guys about welfare standards and standards, shelter standards within India. And I think it's really important that, that somebody pioneers a shelter standard for the country. And I don't think we can take information from other outside organizations and get ideas, but I do feel it's really important that the individual country develops those standards. Because A, it needs to be achievable, and B, it needs to be something that's relative to the situation. So, of course, the situation in the UK is different to the situation in India. So, I've learned through my visits over the last few years, this is my 4th time in India now, each time I learn more, and I find out more about the varying situations. But you guys are the experts. You're the guys, the ones that are living it day in, day out. So it is very difficult. It doesn't happen quickly. But once we start to look at welfare, when we start looking at welfare, then we can actually really start to assess where we're at and what we need to improve on. So these are a couple of things that we can look at. Like I said, these are a couple of resources that you could look at when putting together a welfare standard. We could look at the ADCH or the Association of Shelter Veterinarians. There's lots of stuff out there. But it is going to take a group, somebody, an umbrella organization, maybe someone like FIAPO that could actually help pull these things together and start thinking, well, what's important to our shelters, what's relevant to our shelters and our situations, and then start to put those standards together. So this is the case study I was talking about. I first visited this shelter in Bulgaria, in Sofia, in 2013. They had 500 plus dogs, limited staff, volunteers, regular dog fights and deaths. When I arrived, they said, yes, generally speaking, we'll be losing at least one dog a week through dog fights because the groups were large, the stresses were high, disease was rife, injuries were rife. And of course, a dog, I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but dogs that are in pain and discomfort are going to be more conflicted. They're going to be less tolerant to handling and to interactions with other dogs. And disease was a big problem. So this is the rescue organization, Animal Rescue Sofia. This is their website. They're actually very willing to share their ideas. They're very willing to be contacted, emailed. It's something, if there are things that they can share from their experiences, then they're very happy to do that. This is the original shelter. So, and this is a quote from Svetlo, one of the people running the shelter. They had very little funding for anything else other than keeping the dogs alive. And they weren't able to keep all the dogs alive because of the fights and the deaths. So this is the kind of situation that they were in. Oh, no. And, oop. Knew that was going to happen. So it was very much put together, pallets and fences. It started off probably around 100 dogs, and then of course they got a warehouse, and then suddenly they could actually put a lot more dogs together. So I don't know if this has got noise volume on it. And it's upside down. Well, that's clever. This wasn't in Australia, this was in Bulgaria. Okay. So you can see that what they'd done there with, to try and reduce the dog fights, they'd actually put dog food in the beds. So it was basically ad lib feeding. They were putting food out all the time. But obviously there are difficulties with that. So potential for overeating, obesity, obviously vermin, rats getting in, etc. And certainly that's one of the issues they had, was when rats would get in, dogs would then kill them, and then they fight over them, and there would be more conflict. So this was a difficult place for a dog to be, but it was also a difficult place for people to be. So volunteers would come, not stay very long, and then leave again because of the noise and the difficulty. But adoptions were so low. So they basically, at this point in 2013, 95% of their adoptions would be outside of the country. They would adopt to Germany and Sweden and UK online. So if people came to the shelter, they wouldn't adopt. Because walking into something of that noise is very difficult to try and pick a single dog out. So now they changed their design. They actually fundraised for 5 years. They managed to change things internally. They've actually came to the UK and looked at some of the models that we'd used. They had actually decided to put glass and PVC kennel fronts. The biggest change that they made, they took their groups of 40 and 50 dogs and condensed them down to groups of 2, 3, and 4 dogs. So they reduced the size of the runs. That's the inside now. So they actually split the runs. They did get a new veterinary suite. That did come from a grant, or a proportion of it came from a grant. Dogs Trust does offer international grants. You can go on Dogs Trust Worldwide and look at the grants procedure. I don't know, it's not my area, but that's something you can look into. Again, obviously that's all had an impact on the quality of life. That's the outside now. So you can see there are smaller runs, but they have 2s and 3s and 4 dogs in. Now the difference here is that those dogs now can come out every single day. When they were in groups of 40 and 50, they just couldn't get dogs out safely. It wasn't safe for those dogs to come out to a different area, to go and explore, to toilet outside their sleeping area, whereas now they have that opportunity. So did they enrich the dog's life? Absolutely. It's a better place to be. Do they get more quality time? Yeah, because they're coming out with the staff and the volunteers. They get better veterinary care, and the chances of rehoming has improved. Now it's absolutely tipped on its head. And some of that is a cultural thing within Sofia, within Bulgaria, that now the rescue dog is becoming more popular as an adopted dog. But now there's currently about 75% in-country rehoming. So they're not rehoming as many, nowhere near as many, out to other countries. So that's really changed the process. So yeah, absolutely, if you're looking at shelter design or building shelters or extending your shelters, first thing I'd say is don't. But if you have to, if that's the situation you're in, get help. Think about, who can I talk to? Who can I get help on design and just reduce those mistakes? We've been making mistakes for years. The amount of the shelters now that we have that were of our older design are noisy, are more stressful. Our newer shelters are much less stressful because we keep improving. But they did it through education. So this is our second workshop up here on the left. They used the resources. They came together. They found a way of making improvements in their environment, in their city, in their country. They got other people involved. We can't do this alone. We know that. That's why we're all here today and over this weekend, because we know we can't make those changes on our own. So we need to try and balance the numbers, because if you do have a shelter that is built for 100 dogs, but it's populated by 200 dogs, of course that is going to impact on your money per dog. That's going to impact on the ease of cleaning, time per dog, money per dog, vet care. So we have to really consider what we can, at a good standard, care for our animals. And I think that's really important. It's hard. It's really difficult to do. Because if you say, no, we're full, we can't care for any more animals, because if we do, we're going to compromise these animals. That's a really difficult thing to say. And but it is so important. So do the maths. Basically, if your cost per dog for appropriate welfare, and it is going to vary, you are going to get some cases that need more money investment, more veterinary input. But really, on a rolling basis, we should have a money per dog allowance to maintain good standards. And that's what we really want to be able to achieve. So my top 5 enrichment opportunities are their health, living quarters, handling, daily activities, and their feeding habits. If we think about their health, you have to have that good veterinary care. If we don't have it, if dogs are living in pain and discomfort, and if we're not aware of that because we haven't got good assessment processes, good awareness of what a dog looks like in pain or discomfort, good education around those areas, then it's going to be, we're off to a difficult start. Enrich their environment, their accommodation. So this top picture in the top left was up in the Philippines. They had group living dogs, and they just had this one area. You can see the sort of concrete bunker area at the back where the dogs would sort of congregate in bad weather or to get some shade. They did have some trees in there, but we suggested maybe just building some platforms. So these are just out of bread trays, or they could be pallets. And it's just about creating different levels, opportunities, choices. If the dog can sleep on top of them, underneath them, behind them, if that just one choice improves the dog's quality of life, their welfare, then let's do it if it's an opportunity. The small picture next to it is a picture I took in Hong Kong, and there were individual kennels with no space to move, no space to toilet away from their sleeping area. So they really struggled. They absolutely really struggled, and they planned to build another set of these kennels in the area that they were currently exercising the dogs, because they were at capacity, and they said, we need more of these cages to help more dogs. Hopefully I've convinced them that that's not the way forward, because the only area that these dogs had to get out of that cage was that small exercise area, which they were getting out once a day. So take that away, and their welfare and quality of life would have absolutely plummeted. Keeping cats and dogs together, so you can't really see this, but on the bottom there you've got cats in the top cage, dogs on the bottom cage. It's not appropriate. It's from the cat's welfare, feeling of safety and security, and also from the dog's perspective. I visited a shelter in Austria where they had, again, large numbers of dogs. I think it was 500, and they had 700 cats. And they had all the dog kennels below and all the cattery above. And the amount of dogs that were just staring up and barking and getting frustrated about these cats that were, and we see it in our gardens, and my own dog, that there'll be a cat sat on the fence just going, can't get me. But that's just a small proportion. If you're living like that, hugely frustrating, but potentially certainly very scary for many cats as well. So it may just be as simple as just getting them off chains. If you have dogs on chains or tethered, you will improve their welfare, their quality of life, by getting them off those chains into a more suitable kenneling area. If they're living in cages, getting them out of cages into kennels. So we're not talking about making life luxurious. We're just about offering choices, increasing space, reducing conflict. They're all the things that actually will really enrich the dog's lives. Enrich your handling. Now, I've got a little video which hopefully won't be upside down, but we'll see. But I've learned a lot about handling dogs around the world. So street dogs, shelter dogs, pet dogs, and sometimes the pet dogs are the hardest and the worst, just because they've had so much bad handling by their owners. They've actually had so many experiences of poor handling. But shelter dogs as well, I really want to improve the quality of handling. Like I said, I'm currently training our staff at our UK centres, our UK shelters, to improve their handling, their awareness of what they do. Now, I do this session, I do this handling session in the UK that might start to get a reputation and might start to move out into other centres before I arrive there, and people might stop coming because of it. Because I pick somebody, generally at random, but I kind of ask for permission, and I greet them really inappropriately, because that's what we do with dogs all the time. So I will walk up to, don't worry, we've got some worried faces now, especially at the front. Don't worry, I'm not going to come down there. But I'll walk up to one of the staff members and I'll pat them on the head. I'll go, all right, mate, how you doing? To a staff member, to a person. Or I'll grab their cheeks and go, oh, yeah, how are you doing? You can imagine the reaction. Like I said, I ask permission for the person I'm going to do it to, but I don't tell anybody else. So these are the looks that people, or I come up and I grab their ears and I give them a really good ruffle. Or if I want to move somebody, that same person, I'll grab them by the neck and go, come on, I want you over here. And people are like, what are you doing? It's like, I'm doing what everybody does with dogs all the time. That's how we handle dogs. So we just need a bit more thought. And it's not that these are bad people. We're not bad people, but we are guilty of handling dogs inappropriately sometimes. It takes time, it takes practice. The reason why this handling tends to happen is because people are in a rush. I need to get this dog from there to there in quickly because I need to get on to the next thing. But the effect that you have on that dog by grabbing it by the neck and going, come on, out you go. And just because the dog doesn't bite you doesn't mean it's okay. The learning that goes on creates an association that dog starts to build and build. So when a dog does bite somebody, it's usually for a number of reasons, but usually because they are in pain or discomfort, very frightened, or they have learned that nothing else works. They've tried and tried to show you that they don't want to be handled that way, and they will have built up, and eventually, because you haven't listened, they'll bite. And when that happens, the person usually says, came out of nowhere. No reason for that whatsoever. There's always a reason, but we're just not always aware of it. So I'll hopefully show this video the right way up. Nigel, you're in this video, sorry, but Nigel's one of the best dog handlers I've seen in many a year, so if you have questions, please grab Nigel. Don't grab Nigel, because that's inappropriate. We've just talked about that. Just come up and ask him politely. Oh, dear, come on. No. Maybe you're not going to be a star in my show, Nigel. No. Any help on the video front? It should be embedded. I really wanted to show this video as well. It was in Blue Cross of India in Chennai when I visited. So it should be on the next one, yeah. It should be so that you click forward and it goes to the next one. Maybe I'll show it at the end. I've got a memory stick. Sad face. Okay. But I will try and show you the video. It's really important. I think, like I say, we just need to be really aware of how we're handling our dogs. We need to make sure that we instruct people how to handle their dogs, not presume that people know how to handle dogs, because we're very guilty of that in the UK. And when we bring a dog out to meet a doctor, and there might be 4 of them there, mum, dad, 2 kids, and what happens? Do they all stand there and go, oh, yes, he's very nice? No. They go, oh, my God, he's gorgeous. And they're on the dog, and the dog's going, oh, God, what's going on? They've never met that person or those people before. It's inappropriate. It's not, we wouldn't expect our children to be greeted like that, or to be handled like that. So, we can't expect it for our dogs. And I think, taking time and those first interactions, the first time we put our hands on a dog, if it's a positive experience, we start building those bridges. We start building those relationships, that trust that's so important to us. And every time we interact with a dog, it's learning, every single time. So just because it doesn't do anything doesn't mean it's not learning. It's processing, it's finding out what you mean to it, what you represent to it. So, you know, I'll try and get that video on afterwards. But we can enrich their daily activities. So this is a video at our Merseyside centre, and all we've done here is tie a bunch of branches with holes cut in to the tree trunk, put some treats in the little holes, and we can put those, if we have a little wooded area, you can do a whole bunch of those, or you can create just a little pyramid where you can add food. You know, this is just somewhere for the dog to go, to use their nose, to find things, stuff they would do in the I was going to say the wild. I don't mean the wild. Normal behavior. Finding food is a normal behavior for dogs, particularly for our street dogs. It's a big part of their day. We take that away from them when they come to shelters, and we restrict it to, right, there's your food at that one point in the day, or maybe twice if they're fed more than once, and that's it. So that really doesn't take care of their normal, natural behaviors. But by putting things together like this, hide-and-seek games, I've got my old dog, bless her, I lost her a couple of months ago, Molly, big, black, hairy thing. And even in our hot summers of about 18 degrees, she really struggled in the heat. So I just basically got a bit of tarpaulin, put a few rocks around it, filled it with water. That was her favorite place to be on a sunny day. But that absolutely improved her quality of life. We can do that in our shelters. We can create areas that are interesting to our dogs. So if this is a dog that I first saw in Poland. In Poland, they had in this particular shelter, they had quite a lot of problems with pit bull types. The volunteers were scared of them. They're big, powerful dogs. So the volunteers wouldn't take them out. So they lived in this very small kennel area alone. So when we went and did a workshop there, I started to get to know a few of these dogs, got them out, started interacting with them, started playing with them. And I said to the guys there, why do we not get these dogs out? What is holding us back? And he says, because when we go out with the dogs, they're just grabbing us. They're grabbing us all the time. They're jumping up at us all the time. And I said, well, why do you think that is? And he says, well, you know, they've got nothing else to do. So I said, well, let's find something else for them to do. Let's give them something else to do. Let's give them something more appropriate than using us as the play tool. So yes, it's very enriching for a human, for some dogs, to interact with them in the appropriate way. But if we can give them alternatives, then we can make a difference. So this was a shelter in Hong Kong that I was at last year. Yes. And they had local colleges that would come to the shelter and do volunteer days. And they would take the dogs out, and the great thing about this is, you know, they had the time. They were there for the day, and they had the time. So when I said to them, so how many dogs are they taking out? And so they could try and get them all out. So they're really rushing around, and I said, well, maybe if they're coming regularly, if they're coming once a week or once a month, maybe they just rota that. And rather than getting all the dogs out in a big panic and rush, which is high stress levels, lots of noise, maybe just take dogs out for longer, spend some real quality time with them, and improve that individual dog's quality of life. And then the next time, they can take a different dog out, maybe a dog that didn't go out the last time. Because what we think is good for them isn't always good for them. Because our perception, certainly in the UK, is that you have to walk dogs twice a day. Now, if that's not right for the individual dog, it's not right. And for you guys, and for what your dogs need, is going to be very different. So it's about finding out what they need, what's important to them, what they like. So this was the area that they had in Poland where they would take these dogs. It was just a bit of scrub land with some trees in. And I said, well, why don't we just create something that is a better place for the dogs to go, something that the dogs could enjoy going, where the volunteers could take them and encourage the dogs to do other things rather than grabbing their arms or grabbing their legs or jumping on them. So we got together some bits and pieces, just went around, went to different factories, different yards, and just said, have you got anything that we can use? So all free. And then we got a bunch of crack builders. These are just volunteers from Dogs Trust that came over from the UK to Poland to try and figure out something. They did bring a few other bits and pieces. And they just cobbled together bits and pieces to try and create an area of interest for dogs. What they did do, though, is they made it a community day. So they got people from the community, from colleges and from different work environments, and they came and helped out. So it was a full, actually it was 2 days, full 2 days of getting things prepared, and really brought the community together. And they created basically a fun park for dogs. So there was an old climbing frame that came out of a council yard somewhere, tires. It doesn't have to be painted, it doesn't have to look pretty. But actually, from the people's perspective, and one thing that they use this for all the time now is marketing their dogs for adoption. So they, I was going to say, I'll show you a video. We'll see. But it looks nice. So it looks like a nice place to go for the dogs and for the people. It gives the people something to do with their dog. Because the trouble is, if you just put a dog and a person in a room or in a bland area, all they can do is go, yeah, there's a good dog, there's a good dog. Now, that might not be that enriching for that dog. For some, it may be. But actually, if you give them areas to explore, and you can hide treats and toys and things around, and you can encourage them to move up and down things. A great use of a wheelbarrow, I think, but the reason I took the photo was the barrel at the back with the flower pot sticking out. So you could put different scents in there. So you could put, so you could put some straw in there. So the dogs can just go up and sniff different scents. So novelty, but novelty in a safe environment. Just created that little bit of interest, getting them to use their nose in a productive way. Oh, actually, the video is going to work. So this video it's not about being a great agility trainer. It's just about the connection between the person and the dog. Giving the dog some self-control, but also giving the dog the anticipation of something positive happening. Now, this obviously didn't happen overnight. This took some training. But I'm going to move it forward a little bit because it's quite a long video. Sorry. No, maybe I'm not. No, I don't know how to do that. I want it to get to a point where you see the interaction between the dog and the person, because that's the thing that really is what it's all about. So what you're looking at is just you're looking for enjoyment from the dog and the person. So they've got a little water pool there. I think later in the video they're putting toys in the water pool just for the dog to dig it out. Little puppies in there as well. But now they have people queuing up to get into this area, whereas the volunteers they didn't want to go in there, they didn't want to take the dogs out. I think this is where she actually shows him. So he's learning new things, but all his focus is on the handler. And this is the sort of thing that I really like. It's just, yes, the handling's a bit rough, but it's just that's what I want to see. I want that opportunity for, here we go. I want that opportunity for the handler and the dog to be together, to look forward to it. So once the dogs started to realize that this place was available and that they could go to it, when the volunteers got the dogs out, instead of jumping all over the volunteers, they'd be dragging them off to the playground to go and play with them. And it's just such a nice thing to do, even if you're only able to do it once a week. So when we think about enrichment, and we don't have to do everything all the time. We can't do that. When we know, and we'll all have our interests and things that we value. So my wife likes to make plates, so she does pottery. So she spins on a wheel and she makes plates and bowls and vases and mugs. Our house is full of them. We don't need any more plates or bowls or cups. We've got plenty. She doesn't make them because we need them. She makes them because it helps her relax. She's a teacher at school with small children. She needs pottery. If she doesn't have pottery, then we all know about it. So we all have those things, whether it's yoga or knitting or whatever it may be. And it's important that we supply that kind of outlet for our dogs as well. So this is one of our dogs at one of our centres. It's a plastic bowl with some balls in it and a few treats.
Where's your ball? To find this.
This is Toby. having a nice time, just kicking a ball around. So I know the ball's okay, but I quite like the treats better. So it doesn't have to take a long time, it doesn't have to be expensive. It just needs to be fun. And then I'll pee up the toilet. Pee up. Yeah, you know. This is a video that one of our canine carers sent me, because most of the staff now know that I'm really interested in enrichment and improving our dogs' welfare within our kennels. And this guy sent me this video. And I was just like, wow, I'd never thought of that. I never thought that was even an option. Wow, okay. So it's basically a suitcase, or a case, and inside he's got rolled up towels with treats in, and there's a bottle with holes in that's attached along the width of the case. So if he spins the bottle with his nose or with his paw, treats will fall out. Looks like a dachshund there, doesn't he? It's really stretched. He's having just got a good... So you could take this to an area. You could have an enrichment case, take it to an area, sit down and go, there you go, buddy, have some time with that. He's just working out how to use it. He's found something in there. So he's just, unrolling the... I mean, some dogs find it difficult, so we have to make it easier for them. Other dogs are really good at it. So he just unrolled that and found the nice treats. It was a really nice idea, thinking differently, how we can make enrichment portable. Because actually, enriching the kennels can be quite difficult. Because especially if there are a number of dogs in that kennel, you couldn't put a case of food into a large group of dogs, because there would be a conflict, potentially. Oh, no. So we have to be aware, especially when we're dealing with food activity toys, that if it's too difficult, they can get very frustrated, and they might just give up, or it might have another impact on their behavior. So we just need to be really aware that if the dogs are very hungry, or they have a very strong desire for that food, that we don't make it too difficult. Help them out to begin with. Help them learn, problem solve, because problem solving is, it's huge from a welfare point of view. In the same way as when we're doing training with our dogs and teaching our dogs using positive training methods, that has a really positive impact on their well-being and their associations with us. Absolutely the same is when we're helping them along the lines with food toys. So we can have simple things like cardboard boxes. So this guy down here has just got a cardboard box with some scrunched up newspaper in and some dog treats in there, so they can get that out. Scrunched up newspaper on its own. Tennis balls. We've had shelters that have had associations with tennis clubs, and when all the tennis balls are finished with at the tennis club, they go to the shelter, and they can use them for toys and for food toys. Same with football, so football clubs, anything that you can have an association with, and you can even promote them and say, yes, we have an association with this club, then we can actually use those things. It could be toilet rolls with shredded paper in, even plastic bottles. I mean, obviously, with any of this, we have to be aware that there is an increased risk of the animal digesting the food, so we have to be aware and careful of that. But if you take the top off that and the plastic ring around that, and you put some dog food in there, and they start kicking it around and food falls out, that's a food toy. We just need to make sure they're not chewing and eating the plastic bottle. So we have to monitor those things. But even egg boxes, egg cartons, things like that, you can put food into parts of that. These kind of plastic mats, again, more toilet roll ideas, lots of different things. We had, where was it? It was in Japan. No, it might have been Japan. It doesn't matter where it was. We had a school that made a bunch of these baskets, and basically you just get one of these kind of plastic baskets and tie ribbon of cloth material, so it just creates a big sort of almost like seaweed effect, and then you just pop treats in there, and the dog has to get his nose in and start snuffling around. Great for dogs going into homes for the first time, because actually it really gives them something else to do and helps them settle into situations. That's a homemade treat dispenser in the bottles, so they have to tip the bottles over. Again, more toilet roll ideas. Homemade toys. So the bottom one on the left is just a plastic tube with holes cut in and bungs on the end. It could be just jeans cut up. You can plait things to make toys. Those kinds of toys do need to be interacted with, and the dogs need to learn to use them. So for many dogs, you put a toy in the kennel and it goes, I don't know what that means. So we just have to, again, figure out what the individual dog's needs are. So if we think about quality of life, as opposed to overall welfare, so remember when I said earlier that welfare can be a group of animals. This group of animals in this shelter is a certain standard. The quality of life, like I said, has to be individually based. And that's, just a couple of sentences on sort of definition of quality of life. And I think it's really difficult if we don't know our dogs. And this is it keeps coming back to the size of shelters. If you have a shelter with 500 dogs in, how can you possibly know all those dogs? You just can't. Even with the best, care and attention, it's just so difficult to know them fully. So I think for me, the less numbers we have, the better quality of care. And I know that's not easy, but it's about trying to find the balance, really. So if we think about assessing quality of life is really difficult. It's not something that we can do easily, but it has to be done on an individual basis, and it has to, as I said earlier, be looking at all the aspects, everyday activities that we're doing with our dogs. So if we can't talk to them, then we have to find a way. We have to find a way of understanding them. And really, the best way we can do that is by understanding their body language, understanding their choices. If I enter the kennel and the dog moves to the back of the kennel, that's a choice the dog's made. So it's got some anxiety or fear about me entering the kennel. If I wait for a few seconds, it recovers and comes towards me, then that dog has had a choice. If I go straight over to that dog and try and get it on the leash, I've taken all the choices away. So we just need to be really aware of their body language, how they express their emotions to us. So it is difficult because we're dealing with so many animals. And I think that's even more difficult with other species. I couldn't really say because I'm not an expert in any other species. I'm not even an expert in dog. I'm still learning, still trying to get my way around it after even 18 years. So I think we need to really have a good sort of assessment process in our shelters. If we can even have a simple assessment process, even if it's just a likes and dislikes. If you have a dog's name, likes this, dislikes this, and people can add to it. Even if that's the sum of the assessment, that will help. Because if you can reduce the amount of things that he dislikes, you improve his welfare and his quality of life. And if you can increase the things that he does like, again, improving the quality of life. So we need to understand the animal's pathology. We need to interpret their body language. We need to make sure that they can express some of those freedoms, those normal behaviors. And we need to just have a better understanding of the species that we're trying to help. So I think this is one of the things that we have to be better at, because I think really it's very difficult. I know we've got one or two vets in the room. It is incredibly difficult to identify certain animals in pain because they're very good at hiding it. So it can be a real problem for us all. So we just have to keep learning and building our skills. We have to talk about this because it is something that we are all potentially going to be involved in at some point. I work for a non-destruction policy charity, a charity that doesn't put a healthy dog down. Our procedure, our policy on this is that the dog has to be healthy of mind as well as healthy of body. I think it's really important if we have dogs that are not healthy of mind, that is not appropriate. So we have to consider this. It's something as a last resort. It has to, we don't want to be putting dogs to sleep, but if they're physically and potentially mentally imbalanced and we can't redress that balance because of the environment that we're in or the situation in, then we have to have it as a policy. So I'd urge everybody to have a policy. It has to be your own policy. It has to be, but I'd urge every organization to have one. And that might be very stringent, But at some point, I think it's really important that we have that discussion and say, this is something that is on the table in the very worst case situations. Because otherwise, we're not really taking care of that dog's welfare. I won't dwell on that too much. But it shouldn't just be about making decisions on euthanasia. So welfare and quality of life assessment shouldn't be about, are we going to put this dog to sleep? It should be about how can we make this dog's life better. That should be our focus is, how can we make this individual dog's life better? And we can only do that by learning about it, understanding it, creating a relationship, finding out what it really enjoys doing. So the time really is to make a plan. This is, for some of you, not the first step. I recognize a number of you that have been to a number of conferences in the past, and many of you will have been in this situation for many, many years. But often what happens at conferences, and I'm guilty of it too, is that we go to conferences, we get enthused and inspired, and we get, yeah, I'm going to go back and I'm going to do that. I'm going to try that. I'm going to change that. And then you get on a plane or a bus or you drive and you get back to your shelter and then there's a pile of stuff waiting for you, 150 emails or more, and everybody wants something from you because you've been away from the shelter for a few days. That's all it takes, isn't it? And you're suddenly back into, oh, yeah, I've got to get this done, get this done. And the enthusiasm and the inspiration can wane. So for me, it really is one of those things that even before you go back to shelters, is just have a plan. It doesn't have to be a detailed plan. It could just be bullet points. Just say, I want to, from this workshop or from this conference, I want to be able to implement this, change that, try this. Get it down, put it down as something that you really want to try. And you might try it and it might not be successful, but that's okay. We do that all the time. But if you are making those plans, make a plan, not just for next week or for a year, but think, even 2 years, 5 years. Think about where you want to be and how you might get there. Because it's such a difficult situation that everybody finds themselves in that it's very difficult to look outside of today. Because there's always something waiting for you, always problems to be solved on the day. And that just minimizes the opportunity to actually think outside of that and to move forward. But for me, that's something that's really important. And it's something that I've learned, and it's taken me quite a long time, because my first 15 years in Dogs Trust was in a very reactive role. A problem would happen, I would try and help solve it. But now, the last 3 years, I'm involved in a proactive role, where I'm saying, right, these are the areas that we would like to improve on, how are we going to get there? And it feels so different. It's really amazing, really. It's a privilege to actually have that position, because I can think about what we want to be doing in a year's time, and to get to that, what do we need to have in place? What training, what finances, what kind of resources do we need to get to that point? But I know we are in a very lucky situation with regards to the situation we find ourselves in the UK, particularly in Dogs Trust. Okay, and I am pretty much on time, which is very unusual for me, so thank you. Do you have questions, or do you want questions, or is it? No. I'm on 7 minutes. I don't know. We were late, so it's fine. No worries.
Yeah, thank you so much, Steve. A token of our appreciation.